Wisdom from the sages.
Now we've got Reb Shlomo back, thank God, this week, and he's going to talk about Chayei Sarah.
I certainly am. Thank you very much, Mark. So, Chayei Sarah, yes, our Sedra for the week. Perhaps a little ironic because it's called Chayei Sarah, the life of Sarah, but it actually begins with her passing to the next world. As we've done, Mark, in previous weeks, I've tried to look at something thematic that comes out of the Sedra. And I have to say that I was perhaps treading on thin ground, although not for the first time. Everybody, I think, likes a love story, a romance, where you have the young couple that either meet each other or are brought together through a shidduch or whatever it happens to be, and they get married and live happily ever after. Although the path to that point of beginning to live happily ever after isn't always as smooth, and anybody watching who has ever been involved in making a wedding for their children or grandchildren or whatever it is will know only too well. Or in fact, anybody who's recently got married themselves, it's not an easy thing. And we're going to have a look at that today. And off we go. So we do, in fact, have a romance in the Sedra, as I'm sure people will remember, but we're going to analyse it a little bit. So poor Sarah passes away, and we read, first of all, about her death and the burial arrangements that took place. And there is Yitzhak at the age of 37, as we know from previous experiences, and he was single. So his father needed to set about finding him a bride. What else would you expect the father to do? But this was going to be a challenge. This was going to be a challenge because Abraham, Yitzhak's father, Avraham, had established the first family based on a monotheistic faith, in contrast to all the idolatry that Abraham had seen at home and in the nations around him. And clearly, he wanted to make sure that he was going to preserve that fabric of religious faith and for it to continue through the line of his son. So it's not just a case of let's find a nice pretty girl and hope it works. Far from it. It's far deeper than that. And if we look at chapter 24, verse 3 of Genesis, of Parasha, in case people want to go away and have a look at it. So it says that he didn't want his son to get involved with the locals. And in fact, it went as far that he didn't want his son even to travel away to see a girl. He instead involved his steward, Eliezer, and commissioned Eliezer to go and find a bride for Yitzhak. And there's considerable detail there about what went on and the discussions between the two men. But here we have something a little strange, Mark. And I'm going to ask you what you think about this. Because Abraham said to Eliezer, he said, I want you to go El Artzi Vil Moladati. I want you to go to the land where I come from and the place of my birth in search of a suitable bride for Yitzhak. Now, what I'm going to ask you is this. It's only a short time ago in the Sedra Lech Lecha where Avraham is told by God to pack up and get out because of the whole idolatrous background to where he was. So to me, it doesn't quite make sense. But then he's sending someone back to look for a bride. What would you say about that? What do you think?
Well, I think that's very strange. But I can't give a definitive answer.
Okay. Well, fortunately for both of us and for our friends looking in at this presentation, Rashi assists us. Rashi, our prime commentator, speaks on verse 8 in chapter 24. And he says like this, that Avraham knew that back, shall we say, in the Haim, as we might call it, there were Oner, Mamre, and Eshkol. Now, these three people, Oner, Mamre, and Eshkol, they figured earlier on, because it says, V'heim ba'ali bris Avram. When Avraham came to be the first person to be the subject of bris milah, of circumcision, he went to them and asked for their advice as to how to perform the operation. So he clearly had a degree of confidence in them. And Rashi says that in his mind, he thought, well, if my steward goes and checks out some of their families, possibly there'll be a suitable bride for Yitzchak. Mm-hmm. So that's where it all comes. The narrative tells us that Eliezer went on his way as his master directed. It gives us a whole explanation about the request for divine guidance that Eliezer sought, which we won't go into now. And he arrived at his destination and he needed to water the camels because, of course, it had been a bit of a journey. And there he meets Rivka and she introduces herself. So who is she? She says, and I'll quote, she is the daughter of Besuel, who is the son of Milcah, who was the wife of Nahor, who was the brother of Avraham. Now, anybody watching this who is a genealogist will have picked all that up immediately. It took me a while to work it through, and the way I work it through is that she was, in fact, the great niece by genealogical extrapolation of Avraham. Mm. So she was sort of part of the mishpacha. Mm-hmm. Right, so Eliezer, he's very happy, and he gives us some very beautiful, expensive gifts of jewelry and so on. And then who comes along on the scene? Her brother Lovon. Mm-hmm. Now, this Lovon will appear later on, and I think for Lovon we can almost read Lobus. He was quite a cunning character. Mm. Later on, in a few weeks' time, we will find out how he tried to cheat his son-in-law Yaakov, and I won't go into the details now. You can wait eagerly for that one. And he came along and he saw what was going on, saw the gifts that Eliezer had given the sister, and he said, come in, welcome, and invites Eliezer in. So who was there? There was Eliezer and Lovon and Lovon's father Besuel, and they heard about this proposed match. Well, apparently Besuel wasn't too keen, but Lovon could already hear the chink of gold, as it were, and saw even more gifts that were offered, and so they sat down to celebrate the making of the shidduch. But, and there's always a but, there's always a but. Verse 45 tells us something a little unexpected. They sorted out the shidduch, and it was obviously the case that Rivka was then going to travel back with Eliezer to Avraham's house, meet and marry Yitzchak. But it tells us at verse 45 that the next day her brother, Lovon, who we know, and her mother set about making the arrangements. Was somebody missing here? We've got her brother and her mother. Who are we missing? Her father, Besuel. He was there yesterday. What's happened? And the Midrash in Bereshis Rabbah, and also the Midrash Agoda, also tell us this, that Besuel was actually against the match, and he put poison in the wine cup of Eliezer. but an angel appeared, moved the cups around.
Oh.
Basuel drank the poison cup, beginning to sound a little bit like the end of Act 5 of Hamlet, Lahavdil. And he died, and therefore he was out the picture. Fine, well, there you go. But we do know, of course, that Rivka went with Eliezer, met Yitzhak, and they married, and, well, they sort of lived happily ever after. There was, of course, the problem of no children, but that we'll be looking at a bit more next week. So I've sat back and tried to analyse what we learn out of this whole story. What are we learning about? It's not, all plain sailing. And to my mind, there are certain things that come out of the story. First of all, the concept of honesty in negotiations. Being straight with people, not trying to take an advantage, and behaving in a proper way to make what we call a Kiddush Hashem. That's the first thing. And also, not just in negotiations, but in one's dealing with other people, not putting on a front of some description, but being something else in reality. We all know people who, if you like, smile to your face, but as a friend of mine used to say, they greet you with open knives. And it's an unfortunate fact that there are people out there like that, and it's something to take into account. So dear old Lovon and Basuel were cunning. They were making their machinations over this whole deal, looking at what was good for them. Well, of course, God, who runs the world, wasn't going to have any of that, and organise things accordingly. So we need to take away the message that we have to behave in a proper way. Right? We have to deal with other people in such a way that they believe that we are honest and straightforward. And that's not just within our own group, but in dealing with outsiders as well. That, to me, seems to be an important point to take away. And we'll see next week how the young couple fare and what goes on in their lives thereafter. Thank you, Mark.
That's very good. That's very interesting.
Do you have any questions?
No, I don't think so.
Okay,
I think
good. In that case, I'll have to try harder.
I think you've dealt with them all. You always give such fascinating insights into the Sedra.
Well, thank you. Very kind.
And next week, what have we got to look forward to?
Well, next week, of course, we find out that both Yitzhak and Rivka wanted children, and children were not forthcoming at first. And eventually, the twins are born, Yaakov and Esau, Jacob and Esau, two very unlike twins, totally dissimilar from each other, different views on life, different ways of living, and it caused, if you like, a big division. And when we come to look at the blessings that Yitzhak bestowed on his two sons, we see a very different perception, a different take on things, and the happy family, unfortunately, doesn't always stay happy. Again, it shows you that the Torah deals with real people. Yeah. It's not a book of fairy tales. It's real people with feelings, emotions, desires, and so on. So that's on for next week.
Goodness, a bit like a Jewish EastEnders, really, is. It's like a soap opera.
Well, okay, in that case, I think it's time to end the recording and you can take me to the Old Vic for a drink.
Excellent. Good. Well, ladies and gentlemen, I'm sure that you all enjoyed our presentation today. And as we say every week, please don't forget to like and subscribe. And please give us your email address, because we've got something exciting. If you do enter your email address this week, you'll get a brand new copy of a book that we produced on the Sedra operation. And Reb Shlomo, thanks very much again, and we look forward to seeing you next week.
Always a pleasure to be here. Thank you for inviting me. Great to see you good people out there, and please come back for more.
Bye-bye. Thank you very much.
Please click the like button and subscribe to our YouTube channel for some great content.